sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
Sinners, saints, bitches, whores, sluts, skanks, pole smokers, ass munchers. How we doing? How we feeling? Are we feeling sexy? Are we feeling just fabulous and just looking forward to a great day or night of fun, frivolity, and fucking, if that's what you want to do? We're going to shake things up just a little bit this week and really think outside the box, sort of. We're going to talk about something that I don't think I've really talked about before. So brace yourselves. Let's talk about sex.
Oh, God!
I'm sorry, what?
For real?
Whatever.
Really?
I know. You're like, what the fuck, bitch? You talk about sex every damn week. And you're right, I do. And I'm sure you're all thinking, what the hell could you talk about that you haven't talked about before? I really want to take a look at the differences between the younger generations of gay men and older generations of gay men, and how differently we look at sex and how much knowledge we really have about the physical act and potential consequences of sex. And usually when someone mentions consequences, almost everybody immediately thinks about unwanted pregnancies. And true, that is a consequence of unprotected sex sometimes. If everything falls in place just right, yes, pregnancy happens. But for gay men, I think those of us in the older generations, we carry the scars of the ultimate taboo. The disease that we weren't supposed to talk about. It was only whispered about in hushed voices. The disease that would destroy your life, not only physically, but emotionally. Destroy your family. Destroy every aspect of your life. The disease I'm talking about, the one that evolves from the HIV virus, is called AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. There are plenty of STDs in the world, we all know, and there are different ways, of course, you can protect yourself from STDs, and we'll get into a few of those. And sinners and saints, I'm not a doctor. I am going to be speaking from my personal experience, from what I've learned over the years, and the methods I took to be prepared for sex and its potential consequences. So I want to take a little bit of a trip back in time to talk about HIV/AIDS, just to give every one of you a little bit of a background of what it was like living under that shadow of a deadly disease that really did not have treatment. So here we go. It was probably in the mid-70s, and this is before my time, so I'm basing it on what older gay men have told me. But it seems to be that in the 70s, there was a growing acceptance of gay people in society. There was a growing understanding of science, biology, and it really did start to make a dent in these moral arguments against homosexuality. And with that growing acceptance, there was a growing sense of freedom, and gay men were absolutely enjoying very active sex lives. There were bathhouses in certain cities. There were lots of private clubs where you could hook up with as many men as you wanted. You could have all the sex you wanted. And the only concern at the time were STDs like gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, perhaps hepatitis. But then also you had herpes. And of course, just think about it, crabs, pubic lice, but all those things could be treated. And so there wasn't a worry about something being fatal. Then, around 1981, doctors began discovering this weird combination of illnesses, which later became known as AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Religious people pounced on the disease, pointing the finger at gay men, saying that God was punishing gay men for having gay sex, which is a load of bullshit. But that stuck. it took the gay rights movement back decades. People really did believe that it was solely the fault of gay men in the United States for the spread of this deadly disease. And there was no treatment. If you were diagnosed with HIV, you were told to take your vitamins, try to eat right, stay active and healthy, and you basically waited to die. In the bigger cities, everybody was sick. People were dying weekly, it seemed. And in areas that weren't so populated, like in the South, outside the cities, AIDS was this scary monster, but it seemed to be far away. It was in the big cities and you didn't have to worry, at least you thought. But then you realized that people in these small towns would go to the bigger cities, to the clubs, and they would engage in sexual activity, which is everybody's right, by the way. It took upwards of 7 years, I think, in the Reagan administration before the Surgeon General was endorsing safe-sex practices using condoms to protect yourself. But the gay community had already been ravaged before science even had a name for the illness. It was running like wildfire through the gay community. And as a young boy who knew he was gay at a young age, the thought of AIDS was terrifying. If you were in the closet and you were diagnosed with AIDS, you were outed right there. If you had HIV, you were a gay man, you were taking it up the ass, you were nothing but an abomination. You couldn't hide anymore because of that disease. It was literally a scarlet letter for gay men. We all know that it's not only gay men who become infected. Anybody who is Homo sapien can be infected. IV drug users, people with hemophilia that required multiple blood transfusions. Anybody who may have received blood at a certain time back in the early 80s, they might have been infected. Nobody knew how far the disease had gone for years. It took a long time to work out how the infection was spreading and what range it had already covered. So me being this young gay boy in a little country town in Tennessee, we would watch the news and AIDS was on the national news, it seemed like almost every night. And constantly they focused on gay men having it. Gay men would be ostracized. People would not touch you. They wouldn't come near you. They were afraid you could catch it by a handshake or a kiss. Kids who become infected through their hemophilia were banned from schools or separated out from their classmates. You were treated like you were a leper, like you had leprosy. It was literally called the gay plague by some people. You even had a sitting senator from North Carolina who blamed gay men and IV drug users for the spread of AIDS. It was horrific. So it was beaten in my head through media that gay men get AIDS. And I told you all, if you remember, that when I came out to my brother and sister-in-law, the first thing that my sister-in-law asked was, did I have AIDS? I could have lost my cool. I just replied, no, I don't. Growing up in that environment, you become more and more aware of the risk that you might pose by being a sexually active gay man. I lived at home. I have a younger brother and I have my dad. Well, while I was not really sexually active, I had had a couple of encounters that to me were sexual. And it was the HIV virus that really did motivate me to leave my parents' house because I was afraid that, okay, if I got infected with HIV and I shaved and I cut myself and my dad accidentally used my razor, I could accidentally infect him. What if I cut myself and bled on my mom or my dad or my brother? All those things just would weigh on me to the point of affecting how I behaved totally. I couldn't get through my head that with safer practices, using a condom, mutual masturbation, talking to your partner, understanding what you will and won't do, practicing safe sex, it would have minimalized any of those possibilities. But at that time, it was horrific. And you did not want to be the one outed for having AIDS and exposing your whole family to it. Because people thought at one point, no lie, they believed that you could get infected by mosquitoes. They did, honestly. So that was my motivation for moving out, even though I really couldn't afford it. As the AIDS crisis continued to get worse, and a lot of people were dying, and yes, I have friends who died of AIDS, I learned that there were a lot of things you could do that were totally safe and totally fun. I remember this one time. It was actually a Tuesday night. I was at a happy hour at the only gay bar that had happy hour. And I met this guy. He was a little bit older than me. We hit it off. We were chatting and stuff. And he invited me back to his hotel. And I went. He was hot and I really wanted to have some fun. We get there and he is up front. He said, I am married to a woman. I am in the closet. I love my wife, but I need this. And he said, I am not taking any kind of disease back to my wife. So I want to blow you, but can I blow you with a condom on? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. If that's what you like and that makes you feel safe, absolutely. And he did. It was great. I know people might scoff at that, but I actually appreciated that he was at least that forthright to me, even though he was cheating on his wife. That's why we had flavored condoms, and you wanted to make sure that the lube was water-based, and you did things that made you enjoy a great orgasm and not worry that you're going to infect somebody with not just HIV, but with gonorrhea or chlamydia or syphilis or herpes. Trust me, some of those aren't pleasant, to treat. Very uncomfortable, from what I understand. I am a very lucky gay man. I have not had an STD. I have been exposed to crabs by a boyfriend once and by another married guy who apparently didn't realize he had them. I can only imagine what his wife had to say about that. But that was just a part of my sexual life. And for me, that's why for most of those years, I rarely engaged in anal sex. And if I did, it was always with a condom, except for one moment of weakness when I did not have a condom and I went ahead and did it. But the general rule then, as it is now, is to get tested. You should test at least once every 6 months for STDs if you are sexually active. I do know some people test every 3 months, and that's great too. For me, that test after that unsafe sex practice was a bit worrying, but I was fine. Of course, waiting for test results can really wear you out. It's just as frightening as anything. Even though I practiced every possible safe sex behavior, I was still afraid sometimes that I could still be infected with HIV. There was a second time where I met a guy, and it was a one-night stand. God, he was so cute. And I was naive to think that people would always be forthright with you, that they would be upfront and tell you their status. I very wrongly assumed that if someone was actively seeking out a sex partner, a one-night stand, that they were not infected with any STD. Boy, that was a hard lesson. So this guy, really hot, dark hair, hairy chest, beautiful facial hair, just my type. And basically it was an exchange of blowjobs, not even swallowing, just blowing and jacking off to climax. I was excited because he wanted to go out on a date, and I was excited to do that. And so we were actually talking to each other on the phone for like a week after the one-night stand. And in this conversation, like the day before we were going to go out, he said, I really need to tell you something that I probably should have told you earlier. I'm like, oh, okay. And he said, I'm HIV positive. Once I lifted my jaw up off the floor, I just said, wait a minute, you allow me to suck your dick and you didn't tell me that you were HIV positive? And he says, well, there's not that much risk. And while he is right, that wasn't for him to decide. That was my choice. He should have told me up front, and then I would have made the decision. He took my choices away, and I was very angry with him. I said, I could call the police, and they could charge you for not telling me that you were HIV positive. I mean, all sorts of scenarios ran through my head. What if we had gotten more intimate, hot and heavy? What if we had started to have anal sex? Would he have said something then? Would he have told me? Would he have said, hold up, we need a condom and lube? Of course, that is my responsibility to say, hold up, we need a condom and lube before we do this. But damn, it's just all those crazy things ran through my head, and it just increased my fear, even though it might be irrational. I mean, and it's this thing about Southern men in particular. Like, if you pretend something doesn't exist, it doesn't. So I'm sure he was pretending a lot that he wasn't HIV positive and wanted it to go away. Unfortunately, wishful thinking doesn't do that. Being in denial doesn't help anything. I guess I was hoping that with my outrageous response, that it might shake some sense into him to be more truthful with future partners. I really wasn't going to go to the police. I really wasn't going to do any of that. But I kind of wanted him to feel the fear that I felt. And he said, I didn't think it would blow up like this. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. I take it seriously. And no, I don't want to ever see you again. And I never saw him again. I tested negative. And I think I was right to be angry the way I was. But I do know that oral sex, unless you've got really bad teeth, cavities, bleeding gums, you are at a very minimal risk there. But there is still a risk. Absolutely there is. There's also risk for chlamydia and other illnesses that could affect your throat that you have to be aware of too. For me, it was a wake-up call so that I knew then that you have to treat everybody as if they're HIV positive. And that's what I did from that point forward. A really good friend of mine, he died of AIDS. Before he passed, he was sick with HIV for several years. And he and I, we jacked off together. That was fun. It was enjoyable. He blew me once too, and that's fine. The risk of me getting an infection from HIV through being the top when it comes to a blowjob was nothing. I've been blown by 2 or 3 guys who were HIV positive, showing no symptoms, and I'm fine. That was my choice, though. They were all up front. I knew their status, and it was my choice. I could have chosen not to let them blow me or take other precautions if I felt the need to do that. It really was, though, one-sided. There was no anal intercourse. I did not blow them. I didn't swallow. Well, the one guy, oh, God, he was so hot. I did lick his balls while he jacked off. And he came on me, not in me. It is really important to be aware of a person's status. And that means everything. That means, do they have gonorrhea? Do they have syphilis? Do they have hepatitis or herpes? It's worth the effort to understand their status. You need to always remember, it is about you. You are entitled to be selfish when it comes to sex and what you want to do. You have that power. I don't want you to take my word for it. I do believe everybody should be tested if you're sexually active every 6 months, if not every 3 months. But talk to your doctor about your lifestyle, about how active you are and what you're concerned about. And if you can't talk to your doctor about intimate issues such as your sexuality, then you've got the wrong doctor. I think the worst thing ever is someone trying to guilt you into sex or in a way con you into it. Always stand your ground. You have all the power when it comes to what you want to do. I remember once a guy who I thought was really cute, and he wanted to top. And I said, well, if you put on a condom and we'll lube up and everything, I'll consider it. And he tried during our sexual act, he tried to put it in without a condom or anything. And that was it for me. I'm like, you motherfucker, I've told you, you're not putting it in me without a condom. And I left. I got up and left, and I never spoke to him again. I would see him out at the bar sometimes, and I just thought, are you doing this to other people? I hope other people are paying attention to your behavior and understanding the risk. And it's true. There were a lot of social drugs that people took, ecstasy and things that made you feel good in the 70s and the 80s. It's still being taken now, but I think that sometimes you kind of drop your inhibitions, and that led to a broader spread of HIV/AIDS. But now there are wonderful treatments. People live a long time with HIV, and with the right treatment, most people who were infected with HIV actually test negative now, which is a remarkable thing. There were people, when the first initial drugs came out for AIDS treatment, the drugs were so toxic and poisonous. I know a man who was on the drugs at the time. It destroyed his liver. He died from liver failure before he died from AIDS. It's always important to get yourself educated, to know what your status is, to know what you can and can't do to reduce the risk of an STD infection. It's always up to you to make those decisions, and don't ever let anybody else make that decision for you. Well, sinners and saints, I don't really have a whole lot more to say other than I know that was a heavy topic, and sometimes we will have those discussions, but I always want you to remember that we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to take care of our community, and we need to take pride in who we are. And as always, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.